Welcome, everyone. We are really excited to be here for our Mastermind Brain Trust. I've been talking with these incredible voices for months now about what's going on in the world. And we have so many behind the scenes conversations that we wanted to bring the whole group together. Some people will be coming in because I know they're coming off of different talks. We were hoping to get Sherri on. She has another conflict, but Eric should be popping on, and we have another special guest that hasn't been part of our mastermind that'll come on halfway through. But the conversation today is really around practicality for parents. We had part 1, 2, and 3 of the series of homeschooling, deschooling, unschooling, not just our children, but ourselves, because so many of us have to be deprogrammed. But today's really focused on the children because, I think we can all agree that the biggest concern really is for the 7 generations moving forward. What is happening in the world and what's going to be the impact that we're going to see down the line. And so we really wanted to take time to put out a call to action to families as people are moving into this next school season. And I think the consensus is that the more action we take, not just as individuals, but as a collective, unified force, really activating the power of the people, that's when we're going to be able to really have the impact and change things, deconstruct them so that we can build new. So this is really about being creative, innovative, and inspirational to really give parents back the power to know that not only can we take back our children, we can recreate and rebirth the educational systems. We talk a lot about our medical systems, our economies, our world. And so that's what this session's about. And I'm going to start with you, Larry, because you being a pediatrician, really understanding the psyche of the children and what's happening to them as they navigate through these times. So if you could open up the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Imani, and great to see Reinette and Pam and Christiane. Thank you. I'm not sure how many parents are aware of the degree to which the system in which we live today is stealing the brains and the hearts of our children. And what I mean by that is there's a technology and there's an educational system and there's a curriculum and there's an advertising agenda that is pulling children away from brain development and more towards submissions, subservience, obedience, and robotics. And so if we want to open up our eyes and our minds and our hearts, we can begin to see that all of the technology that is currently constructed for children, including the video games, including the apps, the social media, the TikToks, the Instagram, whatever else people are on, is meant to keep children in a vacuum and in a vortex of nonstop searching into a deep, dark space where they never are able to come back out to actually use their brain and think. And the most important things about brain development are that the mammalian brain in humans predominantly develops outside the womb, whereas most other mammals, the neurological system, the brain develops in the womb predominantly. And so we are responsible for nurturing the development of our higher brain centers. And what stratifies us from other mammals is the higher brain center. And that higher brain center doesn't develop because of what you feed it from the outside, what you tell it, what you insert into it. These higher brain centers develop because of the initiative, the motivation, the action, the engagement, and the play of children, so that they develop experiences, observations, discoveries, and are able to come to conclusions and understandings and realizations by themselves, not something that's fed to them from the outside. And what a lot of these social apps are doing, and what these video games are doing, is dominating the part of the brain that works in the chemistry of addiction, habits, and non-thinking. And so as long as we want to allow our children to develop their own thought process, to develop their own discovery of what they understand through the worlds and through their eyes, we have to disengage them from this rabbit hole, which is just keeping them in an addictive, primitive, reptilian brain chemistry of adrenaline and dopamine that's not allowing the critical development of the massive, beautiful forebrain that leads to consciousness and awareness. And so one of the things that I've been saying, and I'm going to close on this one and then, volley with you colleagues. One of the things that I've been saying in the office to adolescents is when the heart pumps, it pumps because it's filled with blood, correct? And they say, yes. And I say, but it needs to be empty in order for it to fill again. Because it can't fill if it's full. And so that empty space, that emptiness, that openness, that moment when nothing is in the heart is the moment when it can open up to receive more blood. And then it pumps after it's full, and then it gets empty again. And I said, and that is what is needed for brain development. But if we continuously fill the brain non-stop with app after app after app after feeding after feeding after feeding, switching back and forth from app to app, looking for stimulation and filling up, we will never allow for the heart and the brain of the child to be empty. Because it's in those empty moments when the body and the brain and the heart can fill. It's in those empty moments when ahas happen, when realizations happen, when insights happen, when thoughts, I didn't consider that before. When there's openness to be filled with things that are coming through the senses, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting, what you're touching. And so when we engage our children in this nonstop filling, this nonstop feeding, we are actually destroying brain development and creating the template for robots and subservient, obedient people who are only going to fill the front of their brain from information that comes from outside. And what's missing in a lot of the adolescents and even young men and women in their 20s is this lack of skills, this inability to figure things out because they were constantly being filled with the stimulation and the answers to make them smart or to make them bright or to make them successful. But in fact, they had no life skills at all. And because brain development is happening so quickly in children, by putting them into these black holes of these electronics, we are not allowing them to have the empty spaces so that they can fill and think and consider and discover and create and imagine and wonder and figure out. And if you as a parent continue to allow the school system as we know it to give them the tablets, to give them the phones, to keep them electronically connected, you will lose your children's development. And when they're older and adverse life comes their way, they may not be able to find the answers in these electronics. And then they'll have no skill set to actually discover how to figure out the answers themselves.
Well, Larry, I would argue that we might already be there, that they don't have that skill set.
I know that.
And education through
I
our
know.
school systems is the ending result of where we are. And
I'll drink to that.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers. But this is part of what we're talking about as far as giving people options. And I think that getting to that place that you're talking about, where those empty pots. This is the moment where, and that's our intention today, to fill that empty space with a different possibility for those of you that are parents out there. I mean, some of I've mother of 6 and homeschooled my children back in the day. My youngest is 18 and actually just getting leaving home and is going to be doing some continuing education, but spent the last 30 years homeschooling my children. 10 of them, raised them in a cafe while I did. And that life skill curriculum that you talked about, Larry, like, it was amazing to me about how many children, because of the influence of electronic devices. And there was a really good article, and maybe I'll put it in the chat, that you put out as far as really breaking down what's really happening with this technology. I think that's a really good point. Chris, as far as this call to action for parents, we're going to kind of move towards that as we go through the conversation, but kind of bringing together what Larry's talking about from a developmental standpoint to the parents that you're working with up there in Maine and around the world. What's your take on this and your message to parents?
You.
Okay, I thought, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. I've always seen the difference between public school kids and those who, up till last year, went to Waldorf schools or were homeschooled. These are the children who can meet you eye to eye. They can look in your eyes. They're present. They're curious. They don't default to a peer group. Now, one of my friends who's written a lot on mothering and daughtering, she calls peer group culture Lord of the Flies. And this is, and think of how artificial a public school is. You're only with your age-matched peers, starting in preschool, and then you go through. And so the only ones that you listen to are that little bubble of people who are chronologically the same age. So my own children, one went to private school, one went to public school, but that was before the Great Reset and the Great Indoctrination. So I knew that I had way more influence over them than the school did, because I would talk about everything that was going on in the school, and I would go in there and I would make myself known. And here's what I want everyone to know. The influence of a committed, engaged parent is infinitely stronger than anything the school system can do, unless you are of that brainwashed style that believes that the school knows best, that those educators must have this figured out. And by the way, if you want the science of what Larry's talking about, which is this reward center in the brain and the dopamine hit, Robert Lustig, The Hacking of the American Mind, is a pediatrician.
I love that book.
Yeah.
Totally recommend everybody read it. It puts all the pieces together. And it's not just that the school knows best, it's the same thing that the doctor knows best. So what you're hitting on, Chris, is spot on.
And then, and then every like on social media. I mean, you've all seen this at a restaurant, a table of adolescents all sitting around looking at their phone and communicating with the person to their right via a satellite on their phone. This is insanity. Now, what I've noticed, and this is interesting, with my 2 granddaughters, they're 3 and 6, there's no electronics allowed, because what the parents noted is even having them use the cell phone to take pictures created some kind of an addictive cycle with this electronic device, where the child turns mean and nasty when you take away the device. Now, this is really weird. I have another friend who has a wonderful little boy who's 7. She learned 2 years ago she couldn't allow a device around him because he got nasty. So there's something going on with the technology that is literally hacking our better angels, our higher natures. I've always been inside a homeschooler, always. And I'm a big fan of John Gatto. He was the teacher of the year in New York State. And he would just let kids follow their own star. But let me be very clear.